My name is Enid Evans, and for the last 30 years I've lived in the Beaches in Toronto. I was the only child of Edgar William Lewis and Edith Mary Ingram. My dad was born in Knighton and my mother was born in Darlaston, which is the west side of Birmingham. I'll start with my grandma. Well, I used to call her Granny. It was my father's mother, Granny Lewis. And she was quite a character, I think. Apart from being very beautiful, she loved to play the game of the grand lady, and she'd dress up so beautifully on Sundays, and my daddy would drive her around the town because she'd had the cook bake some pies for the poor. So she'd deliver the pies and then afterwards drop in on a few friends. And don't forget there were no phones, so she had her calling cards that she carried in this little case, and if the person was out, she'd just leave her card. Then on to church. Well, all this activity had made her a bit late for church, but she didn't mind because she'd reserved a pew at the front of the church, and this enabled her to make a grand entrance. My father and his mum operated a shoe shop in Knighton, Wales, and that is where he met my mother. She came to sing at the local chapel, and he was smitten with her immediately, so he asked the minister could he take Miss Ingram out for a Sunday drive in his motor car. So of course the minister said it would be fine, so he took her out, and then they agreed they were going to write to each other, and she went back to the minister's house. Next morning the minister drove her down to the station to catch the train back to Birmingham in England, and she suddenly spied my father running down the platform. He had a big box of Black Magic chocolates. They were decorated on the front with this lovely fan, and he gave them to her. And then after that, of course, they corresponded and eventually married. Sydney, he was a guy, he could make a weeping child laugh in a minute. One time I fell off a heavy stool, started to cry, and there he was. He pretended to fall off it himself. He went into such antics, he had the whole room in stitches. And then when he visited my grandmother, he always did the bump your nose on the door trick when he was leaving, and we always laughed. It just was always funny. It really is. He kicked it with his toe, you know, then he pretended to hurt his nose. My Uncle Sidney played the harmonica beautifully. He painted and he whistled. He had the most wonderful whistle. We'd always know when Sidney was coming home. We could hear him way, way. It was a strong whistle and musical. He'd be coming down the street and my grandma would say, "Put the kettle on." This is a picture of my mother and her mother and father and her sister and brother, Nellie and Sidney. I thought it was interesting to put this one in here because we've also got the trio, my mother, father and me. We've also got me and Chris and Tracy, my two children. So it was sort of a nice continuity there. That was my grandma's house in the distance. She had a neighbour who used to keep chickens and pump gas. What a funny cross career. And the chickens laid eggs, of course, and my grandma used to send me to Mrs. Dooley's for eggs, and Mrs. Dooley let the chickens in the house. And then when you went for eggs, she'd say, "Look, just a minute, I'll find you some." And she'd reach down the side of the chairs and, "Oh, here's a nice warm one." Imagine. When we lived in Bedford, my dad managed a shoe shop there. It was next door to the cinema. Well, every morning I took my dolls, my teddy bears and my gollywog, and put them on the steps of the cinema and had a lovely time playing. In those days they used to have a superintendent standing on the steps of the movies in a uniform. Well, just before the matinee time, he said, "Time to go home now." And so I'd take my pram, put all my dollars in it and go home. And this is Mark Hamburg. In those days, it would be 1930 2 or something like that. He was a famous pianist, and my mother toured with him over England, and she was termed the delightful soprano, and she loved it, but she was lonesome for her family life, so she never went on another tour. She always regretted really not being a professional anymore. You know, it was sort of a thing she was proud of, and that was, she found satisfaction in being the lead singer in the local operatic company and the choral company, and church, of course, was a big thing. Oh, one of the churches she went to, they gave her this lovely pin. This pin's 70 years old, I can't believe it. And I was there when she got it too. This tiny little woman had the biggest voice you could imagine. She never used a mic, and one time when she was visiting the States, she was going up the Empire State Building, and ahead of her there was a school teacher, and this school teacher was having great trouble with her class. They were all making a horrible noise, and the school teacher said, "Quiet, quiet." My mother let fly with a high C, and they all shut up immediately. It's sort of a nice memory. Now this is a picture of my parents. I think they were probably in their mid-30s or something. They were quite a good-looking couple, I think. I remember them sitting on the couch. She always sat sideways and put her legs on his lap, and he always called her his little beauty. He called her that all his life. It was very sweet. And she'd say, "Some little beauty I am." I think she was a little beauty.